So welcome everyone to day 4 of the Every Child a New Riddle lecture series celebrating 100 years of the Curative course. My name is Libby Sanders. I'm with the Campbell Academy, one of the co-hosts of this event, along with the Anthroposophic Council for Inclusive Social Development. And I am very excited to introduce as today's presenter a colleague of mine, Becky Rutherford. Becky has more than 5 decades of experience in centers and schools serving children and adults with a broad range of abilities. She was a teacher at the Campbell School for 25 years and previously worked as an art therapist in a variety of settings, both anthroposophic and mainstream. She lectures internationally, supporting schools and trainings in Asia, Africa, and North America. So with that, I am very happy to hand it over to my dear friend, Becky Rutherford.
Thank you, Libby. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here on this 4th day of the lecture series celebrating the 100th anniversary of Rudolf Steiner's real talks. They weren't quite lectures that gives us now what we call the Curative course. We should remember that these talks were given to a select few, people that were already very well versed with all the aspects and concepts of anthroposophy. And I know that that is not the case for those who are tuning in. Tuning in, that's a very archaic term, isn't it? For those of us who are joining today. But I would say that even those of us who are very well versed, who have taught out of these lectures, who have struggled and researched within these concepts, still find these lectures to be an incredible resource of new questions, new ideas, and inspire people to take new initiatives. Now, I find I'm in a very fortunate position because I am standing on the shoulders of 3 previous wonderful lectures. Jan reminded us that the curative educator holds the past and the future in the now. He spoke about time. And Jamin, he spoke about how the curative educator has to be able to draw on all 4 aspects of space. In fact, to be able to turn themselves inside out, to be inside and outside at the same time. And Rudiger mentioned how within time and space, we need to be able to consciously say yes. Now, the other one, Rudiger of course mentioned many things, but one of the things that stuck with me and I was thinking about as I woke up this morning is that Rudiger mentioned how important festival life is, that we come together and mark occasions. We mark occasions out of memory. We mark occasions that connect us to the cosmos and to the spiritual world, to the seasons change. And I was thinking how festivals take many forms. They don't usually take the form of a 13-day lecture series, but I feel that this is really our festival to celebrate and mark with appreciation and gratitude these lectures that have been given to us. Let's begin with a verse from Rudolf Steiner. In olden times, there lived in the souls of the initiates powerfully the thought that by nature every human being is ill, and education was seen as a healing process which brought to the child, as they matured, the health to be a true human being. I'm going to read it again. In olden times, there lived in the souls of the initiates powerfully the thought that by nature every human being is ill, and education was seen as a healing process which brought to the child, as they matured, the health to be a true human being. Now, the topic for today is the pedagogical law as a path for healing. And it is often a clue for solving the new riddle that every child brings to us. Now, some questions. What is the pedagogical law? What is healing? What is a true human being? And what is magic? But let's put all of that aside for the moment, because I want to tell you a story. A few years ago, I was in Mexico in the Yucatan. That's the part that bumps up out of the peninsula. And it's a very beautiful area, very lush, very filled with vibrancy of nature forces. But everything in the Yucatan has a certain tenderness to it. I know when we think about the nature of Mexico, tenderness isn't usually a thought that comes to us. It seems so vibrant and wild. But in the Yucatan, there's something very small and almost delicate. The trees don't get very tall. The vegetation, although it is very lush, is not towering. And they even have a tiny little bee that has no stinger. It just makes honey. So whatever your imaginations are about Mexico, I want you to try and form this different idea about the Yucatan. And in the Yucatan, there are a number of Waldorf schools, a number of which are very interested in inclusive education and have been for some time. And one of the schools' names is Bashal, and Bashal is a word from the Maya language, which means to play. And it started just with a kindergarten. Now it has gone on to include most of the lower grades. So this little school, Bashal, it's quite in the forest. It's not far from the ocean. And the school is a wide play space surrounded by individual houses, which are the classrooms. Although the children regularly play right into the forest that surrounds the school. So in this lovely school called Play, there is, of course, a kindergarten. And in Mexico at that time, all of the kindergarten teachers wore bright red aprons, part of that vibrancy that lives in the folk spirit of Mexico. And there was a kindergarten teacher, if I remember correctly, her name is Pearl. Maybe you're tuning in. And they had asked me to come and observe. There were a number of kids they had some questions about, so that's why I was there. And Pearl had finished a very beautiful circle time. There had been free play to begin, and then the circle time, and now the children were all going to go outside to play. And of course they had to put their outside shoes on. So you must imagine about 15 or 20 little kindergartners sitting on the floor next to a kind of tall shelving unit that held all their outside shoes. And they're starting to put their shoes on. And from underneath this shelving comes a really big cockroach. Now I know I was telling you that everything in the Yucatan is kind of sweet and small and tender, but not the cockroaches. They're really big. And this monster of an insect comes skittling out from underneath of the shelving. And of course, all of the children completely lose it. They begin to scream. They're shouting, they're jumping up, they're running around, there's absolute chaos. And the kindergarten teacher stoops down and grabs that cockroach up in her red apron and holds it. And she tells the children, if you want to see the cockroach, I want you all to be very quiet. And all of the children hushed. She said, if you would like to see the cockroach, our friend the cockroach, please line up and everyone can have a chance to see it. And each of the children lined up. They took a deep breath of courage. They went and they looked at this dreadful creature. They put their shoes on, and one by one they went out to play. And when all of the children had got their shoes on and gone out to play for their recess time, the kindergarten teacher carried the cockroach out into the yard and stooped down and let it go. And then she went like this. Now I'm going to leave that story right there for the moment, but we will return to it. I'll let you ponder on it a little bit. Now, interestingly, Rudolf Steiner never called it a pedagogical law per se. And it is in these lectures that is the only place that Rudolf Steiner mentions it. Now, this law is not a law like a traffic light that you can choose to ignore. You can choose to break that law. This is a cosmic law. This is exactly like a law of, one could say, spiritual physics. It is happening whether you are conscious of it or not. And the fact that he doesn't refer to it specifically as a pedagogical law, for me, means that that broadens its implications. One can begin to imagine that we could be conscious of this activity of this law in a variety of circumstances. I'm just going to read from this translation, which is the 2014 translation into English, translated by Anna Meus. And this is what he says. Here we come upon a law that applies in all education. It is that it is always the next higher level of essential human nature which acts on the one below, whichever it may be, and that this alone will be effective in making it develop. For development, something living in the ether body, in an etheric body, can effectively influence the physical body. And only a principle living in an astral body can effectively help development of an ether body. Only a principle living in an I can effectively help the development of an astral body. What does this mean? When you note that the ether body of a child is stunted in some way, you must configure your own astral body in such a way that it can have a corrective effect on that child's ether body. We can actually say that with regard to the system of education, it must be put as followed. The teacher's own ether body must be able to act on the child's physical body. And this is a part of the teacher's training. The teacher's astral body must be able to influence the child's ether body. The teacher's I must be able to influence the child's astral body. Even if the teacher has no conscious awareness of this, the whole of education is indeed veiled in a number of theories. Now, just for your later research, I did not read that line by line. I took certain aspects that I wanted to take up today. This encompasses some of the basic foundational concepts that we understand about the human being when it is given to us through anthroposophy. And the effects and consequences of this law are present whether we are aware of it or not. It is a kind of synthesis. It really is a kind of synthesis that rests on the anthroposophic view of the human being. One, that there is more to the human being, indeed to the whole material physical world, that can be perceived by our ordinary senses. Number two, who we are is more important than what we say or don't say. And this is particularly relevant for teachers, but because we're looking at this law in a somewhat broader sense, it is particularly important for everyone. Who we are is the most important thing. And number three, that each of us carry the potential to benefit another human being, and sadly, the potential to harm another human being. Not only through physical support or physical aggression, but through our own beingness. And this is through very powerful qualities, which are much more profound and far-reaching than what can simply be expressed physically. In describing the pedagogical law, Rudolf Steiner is affirming that we are in constant dialogue in every encounter with another human being. We are in an invisible, silent, powerful conversation. It's going on all the time. Now, for me, it's very exciting that we have hundreds of people joining for these lectures. And I know, of course, that there are many joining who are so familiar with these concepts that they have really researched them and worked with them for decades after years of study. And I also know that there are those joining who are hearing these things for the first time. And for that reason, I want to give a brief overview of some of the essentials. Basically, what we want to say is that the totality of me affects the totality of you, and the totality of you affects the totality of me. Let's briefly describe these four bodies, these four members that Rudolf Steiner is speaking about. We have a physical body. Physical body is all that we are that is formed from the material, earthly substance, which is connected to the mineral nature of the world. And the physical body is the only body that is visible. But all the other higher bodies, the invisible bodies, the so-called spiritual bodies, manifest through our physical body. So when you have eyes to see, you will be able to perceive the higher nature of yourself, of other people, of the children that you are involved with. through how they appear in the physical body. Next, Rudolf Steiner talks about an etheric body. Now, these terms are somewhat problematic because they either seem so unfamiliar or they seem so caught up in a kind of New Age, vague kind of way of describing the world. And they are terms that come from 19th century theosophy, actually. But when we talk about the etheric body, we are talking about the life body, the body that gives us our life. It is the first of the next higher bodies. It's, of course, very connected to the physical body because it's through the life body that keeps the physical body alive. It gives the physical body form. It enlivens all the rhythms necessary in the physical body for life. It is always molding, even manipulating every quality of the physical body in order to give it shape and aliveness. There's so much more that we can say about the etheric body, but that is beyond the scope of this little talk this morning. And then the next higher body is what's called the astral body. That also is a problematic word and has connotations that people find connected to understanding that is not what we mean today. Perhaps another way to put that, the astral body, is that essential part which brings consciousness and a connection to the world around us. What do I seek and what do I avoid? I like this, I don't like that. This is the body where, among other qualities, the soul finds a home. And I want to say that we're using the word soul not in any religious sense, but rather what we use during this lifetime in order to shape our identity. And the word identity, of course, is quite related to identical. I find myself the same as this and not the same as that. I love this, I hate that. I am the same as this, but I am not that. And in this way we form a kind of identity that we live in, that we carry forth into the world around us. We find our identity through what we identify with as gender, as nationality, as our interests, what we might connect to for our hobby life, or anything that helps us to express our emotional being. And then there is a higher body, which uses the word ego. And that, of course, is again very problematic, especially as it has come to be used today in the common vernacular, where ego actually begins to mean your own astral body. When somebody has a big ego, they think they're kind of better than everyone else. But in fact, this word ego simply means the I, the individuality. And the individuality, different from the identity, stands alone. An individual is a singular being. It is a unique member present only in the human constitution. And in fact, it lives in at least two places at once. One of the places it lives is to deeply penetrate the next lower three bodies, right down to the toes. Jamin was mentioning that. It serves to help regulate that wild, juicy marvelous self-seeking astral body. It informs the life-giving, forming etheric body. And in the most healthy way, it connects to all the material substance of the physical body. Now, why is this? This is because the other place, so to speak, where the human ego lives is in the spiritual world. It never fully incarnates into the body, into the incarnated physical body. It holds the archetype of the human being, holding the ideas coming to us from the cosmos, the living cosmic thoughts, which potentially become the ideals to guide the thinking, the feeling, and the activity, the doing, the will of this particular lifetime for this particular human being. So these are the members that are always in this constant conversation. It's important to note that Steiner emphasizes that the process always follows a certain direction. The human being is made of different bodies or members. The higher member influences the next lower member in this kind of micro-hierarchy of the human being. And you can think of the image of a waterfall. It's always flowing from higher down to lower. This is a very, very good image for this phenomena, for thinking of the higher beings pouring down through the next lower being. Now, each of us has our own waterfall, falling down from the eye, through the astral body, through the etheric body, down into the physical. It will always go in that direction. And while our own waterfall is flowing down, you can imagine there's like a little bifurcation, a little stream that goes off to the side, so that the higher ego is always going to influence an astral body. My astral body, the astral body of the child, the astral body really of any other human encounter is flowing down from above to below. So my ego is influencing my astral and an astral. My astral is influencing my etheric and an etheric. My etheric is, of course, influencing my physical and a physical. Kind of think of the spiritual bodies splashing and flowing down to the next lower body. I think all of us have certainly had experiences where someone else's mood has affected our sense of well-being. The astral body is affecting the life body, the etheric body. This can be a positive or negative effect. We can see that this easily in children who, when the teacher has maybe yelled at them, hopefully not in any Waldorf classroom, and the child gets a tummy ache, they get a headache, they feel very sleepy, they feel cranky. I would like you to take a few moments now to journal, just for yourself. We're certainly not going to share this. An example of when you experienced someone else's emotional identity, their astral body, affected you in a positive way, that you felt well because of their mood. And we'll take about 3 minutes to do this journaling, and I'll let you know when the time is up. Remember, this is just for yourself. It's not going to have to be shared, so you can be really honest. A moment of self-reflection out of your own memories. finish up your journaling. I always find that this experience of my well-being being affected by someone else's mood, someone else's astral, my etheric body, those are the easiest examples to find. It's more difficult to become conscious of how the life body of someone affects the physical body of someone else, how the health or wellness or its opposite affected your physical body. And this is one that you can't pretend with. You know, Rudolf Steiner gives this wonderful example of when the teacher is approaching her classroom, she should take off all of her own cares, her worries, her daydreams, her wishes, her preoccupations, take them off like a raincoat and hang them up outside of the classroom. And it is possible to do that in the short term in a pretty convincing way. And you can have a very healthy effect on the life body of the child. But if you are unwell or live in a chaotic way with no rhythm in your own self-regulation of your life, this can affect the actual physical body. Perhaps you can think for a moment, and I'll give you a moment to journal again, but to give you a few maybe guiding ideas, because I always find this one to be a bit more difficult to grasp. You might have a memory of a grandparent, perhaps, whose presence, although maybe they were quiet, maybe they didn't even speak, had a way of affecting your physical body. You felt relaxed or you felt healthy. Another example I was thinking of, I'm thinking of all our friends from Thailand who are tuning in, and the wonderful culture of massage, and how different it is to receive a massage from someone who has a chaotic kind of lifestyle. You can sense this. It has an effect on your physical body, that maybe the room is not tidy, maybe they are chatting away to the other worker in the massage place while they're working on you. There is no regulation in their own life body. And that affects your physical body, your physical experience of the massage. So again, let's take a moment to just journal. Can you remember when someone's own body of habits, their own health, affected your physical body? It's the most difficult one. Give it a try. I'm certain that all of you have been inspired to change your ways, and use that since we're still in St. John's Tide, or to turn yourself around, as Jan has suggested, to make a change in how you live, doing what you like and avoiding what you don't like. Have you been inspired by someone else's idealism? Have you been inspired by their way of thinking? Has it enlivened you to make a positive change? This is, of course, the path between the ego, the I, and the astral body. Make a quick note of this in your journal. Take another moment. with this kind of self-reflection and write down some experiences that you have had when your own idealism, your own intentions supported someone else's emotional state. When your emotional identity, your mood affected someone else's life body, their wellness, or when your own well self-regulated habit body or not affected the physical body of someone else's. Now the second question was, what is healing? The opening verse said that education was to serve as a kind of healing, a bringing to wholeness what is fragmented. It is to return to the full nature of the human archetype in a way that my destiny requires for this lifetime. As I mentioned, it's only within these lectures that Steiner talks about this phenomena of the law. And he makes the very strong point that there is no such thing as normal. He makes that point in the first lecture, actually. And that every person somehow misses the full expression of what it is to be human. This was a pretty foreign idea 100 years ago. In fact, 100 years later, it's not foreign to us at all. We've kind of romanticized pathology in our time, that everybody is somehow on the autism spectrum, or everybody is somehow has an attention deficit disorder, and that we're all encouraged to go solve that by taking something from the pharmaceutical industry. And I'm certainly not discounting people's true suffering or the fact that mainstream medicine and certainly anthroposophically expanded medicine can be of great help. But we have a kind of acceptance that we're all not normal. What's lacking is that we don't have a feeling of responsibility that we ourselves can make some steps to achieve that archetype again. But when Rudolf Steiner said this 100 years ago, this was an absolute radical and shocking idea, because it absolutely dissolved the notion of us and them. Those of us that are normal and those them children that are not normal. Steiner immediately kind of equalizes the playing field, sees us all as individuals on the earth at the same time sharing a certain destiny. And what is magic? Let's look again at that brave teacher in the Yucatan and her cockroach. It was as if through magic that she changed the atmosphere of that room. She calmed each child as if she was physically holding them. She made the thrilling anxiety and fear of each child disappear. And she probably did it for the cockroach as well. She empowered each child to self-regulate, get a hold of themselves, put their shoes on, be silent, line up. And she inspired each child. She filled them with wonder at the marvelous cockroach. And then, if you remember the story, she did one more thing after she let the cockroach go. And this was the most enlightening thing of all. She shivered. This showed that she had done all of those same transformations on herself. Her own waterfall was flowing from her I, from her own ego, filled hopefully with the ideals of Waldorf education, to get a hold of her own repulsion of the cockroach, quieting her own squeamishness, maybe even nausea at holding this dreadful insect, and keeping herself from physically running out of the room with the rest of the children. Like any human being, she couldn't sustain this forever. She shivered, expressing all of that fear and repulsion and relief that the moment was over. But she was able to do it for the time that was needed. This is a wonderful example of the pedagogical law in action within the teacher herself and in the spiritual activity with her students. Now, a definition of magic. There's probably lots of definitions of magic. I looked this one up on the internet. Is the power to influence the course of events using mysterious or supernatural forces. Of course, we are aware of forces and energy that is super, that is above, is beyond what we know from a materialistic worldview. And Rudolf Steiner explains that these are the kind of forces that the angels, the gods, so to speak, use on us between death and rebirth, preparing us, helping us, supporting us. And when we, as imperfect humans, engage with these same kinds of forces, as the pedagogical law certainly is, we must be absolutely clear on the morality that is involved. It's quite easy to see how once one is awake to these connections and influences, that they could be used in intentionally harmful ways, manipulative ways, self-serving ways to the detriment of the others. Many people are familiar with the admonition that Rudolf Steiner gives us that for every new step in esoteric knowledge, we need to take 3 steps in the development of our morality, to do the right thing at the right moment, in the right time, in the right space, to say yes in the right way. When we look at the pedagogical law in all its aspects, it makes us, well, me anyway, maybe you too, it makes me realize that we have a responsibility to wake up to ourselves and educate each body, each member, so that what we bring to an encounter is helpful, is kind, is supportive, and benefits the other. So that when we meet the other with a conscious yes, Rudolf Steiner offers many ways to accomplish this education of our members. And you can look to the many different kinds of meditations and other devotional practices that he offers us to educate each of our bodies. For in approaching, and this is a quote from the end of the chapter, for in approaching tasks like those of which we are speaking, it is indeed a matter of undergoing preparations of mind and heart. So prepare yourselves, because each day is a string of nows, and each now is a possibility for an encounter with yourself, certainly, and it often offers an encounter with another human being. And this invisible conversation is flowing. We want to make this conversation one that is fruitful, that is curative, that is helpful. If we were to compress all of these lectures, all of the 12 lectures, into their essence, we could say that curative education has three aspects. The first is that we are working out of an anthroposophic view of the human being. The second is there is an absolute necessity, a requirement, a responsibility for the adult to be actively engaged in their own self-transformation. And the third aspect is that everything unfolds within the relationship that you have with this particular child, this new riddle. And the pedagogical law is shining through all three of these aspects. So, I wish you all a good day, a good evening, and I encourage you all to go out and have good conversations and create good magic. And look out for the cockroaches, of course. Thank you. So Libby, we do have some time still for questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much, Becky. So I think Ava is going to place the link for the Q&A in the chat now, so we can take a couple of minutes to put in our questions, and then Becky will share those with you and see how many we can get to today. So if we could get the link to the Q&A, then we can get started and folks can put their questions there. Thank you again so much, Becky. Continue to post those questions, but Becky, maybe we could go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
So the first question we have is, I'll just read it out. It was my understanding that while the pedagogical law was geared towards children, is this something we can also use to work with colleagues? What does that mean? How would that work?
I think this is a really good question, because in my experience, for a long time, people felt this was just really limited to the relationship between an adult and a child. But over the course of maybe the past 50 years, people begin to experience that this invisible conversation is happening between every human being. Using it is an interesting way to put it. I think becoming more aware of it is maybe a better way to put it, because we don't want to use it in any kind of manipulative way, but we want to become aware that what we bring to a teachers' meeting, for example, since you mentioned colleagues, has an influence on every other person in the room. And if your intention is to have a fruitful teachers' meeting, an efficient teachers' meeting where everybody feels heard and affirmed, then that means that you have to come with a certain inner attitude. And at the end of a long day, you don't always have that inner attitude as you enter into a teacher's meeting. So being aware of these concepts and the power that we all have in every situation to kind of make it a positive experience or a negative experience, make that be your inspiration to take a few moments and have a check-in with yourself. Be aware of what's working in your own emotional life. Be aware of what's working in your own health and well-being, and see what you can do from your higher intention to modulate that so that you can go into a collegial situation with the intention of the best outcome.
Thank you, Becky. That's a good segue to a couple of related questions that we're seeing around how do we nourish or cultivate or heal our own etheric, astral, and ego as educators, as parents, as colleagues. Are there specific things we can be mindful of despite being sometimes in difficult environments?
Despite difficult environments. Yeah, we are surrounded by difficult environments around the world. Steiner gives these very practical, very doable practices that support our own development. We can look to the 6 exercises, what are called the 6 subsidiary exercises, the 7 conditions, the 8-fold path. Each of those is a very kind of systematic way to work on developing a healthy, to developing health in our own thinking and feeling and willing. I could suggest those. And people say, oh, but the circumstances are so pressing and life is so busy and so difficult. I don't have time to take up these meditative exercises. But in fact, you do. Steiner says 5 minutes out of your day, that if you carve that out and take up some practice with dedication and discipline, that this will have a very positive effect on the health-giving aspect to become a healthy person within your physical body. It's often helpful to work with another person on these exercises. I could suggest that, and that the more we are able to take up these practices, or working with a particular verse that you find inspiring, the more you will begin bit by bit to see the effect, that you will be able to live well within yourself and be able to have the kind of inner time that you need before you respond to a situation. It helps us not to be just reactive in the world, but to have a moment in order to determine which is the best pathway. So look to these three kinds of meditative work as a beginning. And there are many people that can advise you on what might be a good way for your path. And Steiner also says to educate your astral body, learn about the human being. Educate yourself about the phenomena of the human being. That's a vast study. I could say also in nourishing and educating our own etheric body, that your own self-regulation of keeping a kind of good rhythm in your own life, of keeping your desk tidy, having rhythm to when you have your meals, when you go to bed, when you get up, to get a hold of a healthy schedule for you that you decide works for you and keep to it. This will also be very helpful. Nutrition, exercise, all that good stuff that they tell us to do, it's all true.
Maybe following on that very specifically.
I can't hear her.
Sorry about that.
Good.
Maybe to follow up on that quite specifically, what are some ways to improve, these etheric, astral, and ego forces as an educator or as a parent? And what sort of meditative practice would you recommend, for people in those roles specifically?
Well, certainly the three that I just mentioned, they're kind of basic to our meditative life. We could also, as teachers, we have a number of meditations that are given specifically for the teachers. All of these can be helpful. And as a parent, I would look to a nice little book called Verses and Meditations that can be helpful for you to find a kind of ground to live out of. It's very educating for your astral body, and it's very nourishing for your etheric body if you can bring these into part of your rhythm in the morning, in the evening. There's a vast resource, and we can, I could just simply suggest to ask people in your circle which would be a good one to start with. The books by Steiner, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, has a good description of various kinds of practices. We can list that, can't we, Libby? And Foundation of Human Experience is another excellent book that you'll find to be very helpful in further understanding these concepts. Oh, and one important thing to mention, just the way as parents or as teachers, or hopefully as human beings, we can be very quick to forgive other people, to cut them some slack, to be a bit understanding when they don't achieve exactly what we think they should be achieving. And we're much less forgiving of our own selves. And I would say that as something quite central, to make a start, accept your failures, start again, and be tender with yourself. After all, we're only human beings.
Thank you, Becky. Maybe that leads us into a different question here. So if self-development is so important, but before we can do anything else, what does this mean when we don't practice this sort of inner work? Does that harm the other?
Yeah, I think in your journaling, we really focused on positive experiences, but often we have sharper memories of experiences that were not positive, that were harmful. You may still be carrying with you things that harmed you from somebody else's emotional life, from an angry encounter with a parent, with another family member, with something that maybe happened in your early school life. We can do damage because we're ignorant of these concepts, and we're ignorant of ourselves. We're not taking a moment for self-reflection. You hear often in just common speech that people will have come upon a kind of self-reflection of themselves. They recognize something about themselves, and then they'll say, and that's just the way I am. They have a little self-insight, and then they say, well, that's it, I'm done, I've recognized it, and there's nothing more I can do about it. That's a kind of acceptable way to be in our current culture. And we need to take that next step. Because if we just stay where we are, we naturally, out of our own astral life, out of our own identity, think that it is completely acceptable to live a life where you only do what you like and you don't do what you don't like. And yet this is a kind of human existence that leads to all kinds of catastrophes. Small ones, interpersonal relationships, large ones between nations. And so this having the courage for deeper self-reflection and a commitment to being better, because that is also a unique human quality. This idea that we're not quite done, that there's always something more. And we mustn't use this in a way that, makes you feel constantly that you're not good enough. Not at all that. But that you have a task. Michael's sitting right over here, my great tech guy. He has a task to become more and more the best Michael that he can be in this lifetime. And Eva has a task over there to become more and more Eva. And we're the creatures that do that. Jan lectures long ago made a great example, of a dog. I have, many of you know, a darling Chihuahua, and she just feels she is complete, and so she is. But as human beings, because we carry the human archetype as our spiritual signature, so to speak, we know that we can expand, we can do better. That's so getting back to what is the damage that happens when we're not aware of this or not committed to educating ourselves. There's the damage that comes from ignorance, and oftentimes that can cause great damage, but it doesn't have the immoral aspect of it, as when people are aware of this silent conversation, this ongoing connection with other people, and they use it in a manipulative way. And you can see examples of this politically, you can see examples of this in dysfunctional interpersonal relationships. And we don't want to be people who cause harm to others. There's enough of that. We need to be people who are looking to benefit others.
Maybe that's a good segue to another question of how we might mitigate harm. So when we experience that we may be negatively impacted by another person, especially in a smaller community, what would be the right thing to do? Is there anything we can do to mitigate or to work upon that change in another person as well as ourselves?
Yeah, the thing that comes immediately to mind is one of the teacher's meditations. And that meditation or verse is, imbue yourself with the power of imagination. Have courage for the truth. Sharpen your sense of sharpen your responsibility of soul. Sharpen your feeling for responsibility of soul. So with those three aspects, those three notes that can point us in the direction of how to try to heal harm that we may have done. We have a responsibility for the soul wellness of the other. We have to have courage for the truth, to see that we've done harm, and have courage to make amends, to have courage to bring that to consciousness, and to our imaginative powers to think of creative ways that might need to be done. I'm still waiting for the two questions that usually come after a discussion of the pedagogical law. One is, what affects the ego of the child? And the other is, what effects does the physical body of the teacher have on the child? What does the physical body of the teacher affect?
The second one was the next question on the list. Maybe just before jumping into that, though, would you be able to repeat that verse that you
Yes.
you just shared?
Imbue yourself with the power of imagination. Have courage for the truth. Sharpen your feeling for responsibility of soul. So Libby, the next question is, what does the physical body of the teacher affect?
Yes.
Yes. Absolutely nothing. Which is really, it's kind of a riddle, because in a way, the physical body of the teacher is expressing all the higher bodies of the teacher. But the actual material body of the teacher does not affect anything. So that's kind of a relief. It's a relief, but also it's a, oh my goodness, everything is showing. You know those dreams that teachers often have, that you're standing in front of your classroom in your underwear? You know, that's, your physical body is kind of presenting to the world who you are. And in that way, of course, it's the waterfall effect of how my astral body presents through my physical body and affects the etheric body of the child, how my own etheric body manifests through my physical body and affects the physical body of the child. But the actual material, physical substance of my physical body doesn't have an effect, which in a way is quite freeing. It's a funny dichotomy. Both things are present at the same time.
So I don't know if you wanted to jump into your other question that you posed, being something that comes up, or for me to share another one in a somewhat different direction.
Yeah, let's hear from what somebody actually had as a question first.
So this is moving in the opposite direction, that sometimes when we don't feel well, our life body is not healthy, that also affects our feeling life. You know, we don't feel lively or enthusiastic. So is this something of the pedagogical law then working in reverse, working upward? And what could you offer to that?
Yeah. That's to remember that the waterfall always flows from higher down to lower. And when we could feel that maybe we're ill and that makes us feel depressed. It's not that our physical well-being is affecting our emotional life. It's that our emotional life, all four of the bodies are very connected, and the astral body is actually living within the etheric body. And so this connection of, we talk a lot in nowadays of the mind-body connection. It's not chicken and egg. It's not that, oh, I feel poorly today, so that makes me depressed. I'm going to miss something I was looking forward to. It's rather that this astral force and the etheric force are so interconnected that sometimes, you might feel that it's because I don't feel good that I feel depressed. But at every moment, we have a choice to decide how we're going to respond out of our emotional life, out of our thinking, our feeling, and our will. So one person may have an illness, a physical illness, and feel very disappointed and depressed. Another person with a physical illness may rejoice and think, oh, today I can have a rest day and I can stay home and I'm going to read this book or binge Netflix. We always, out of our consciousness, out of our soul life, can make a decision how we respond to what is living in the next lower member. It was a little random, but I think you got my point.
Thank you. So then, next I wonder, there have been a couple of questions around how we can understand the pedagogical law in relationship to karma, whether that's between individuals or for an individual in how we incarnate into the different the bodies that we have.
Can you form that question again, Libby? I can't hear you so well.
Sure, I'm combining a couple of different questions together, but really that on the issue of karma, that every child comes to a teacher that they should come to with a set of bodies that we have. So how do we look at this fact and karma in relationship to the pedagogical law?
That's a very good question. And again, I think it always has to do with the possibility that we do have a choice. You could say that, I have karma with this child, and our karma is such that I am supposed to damage them in this lifetime. We have no way of knowing that. And to speculate like that is harmful in itself. We know that we have this long-standing connection to this particular child, and we always have a choice in how we respond to it. Karma and destiny are there. Our free will lives within our soul life. How we're going to respond to this set of paradigms that is the karma between us. As we educate our own astral body, that allows us to become more and more objective and less reactive to whatever comes towards us. Even when it's something so pleasant, even when you are just so delighted to be in the presence of this particular child, that's a very enjoyable thing and a tender thing. You should deeply live into that. But don't let that be the way that you approach what is needed for the development of that child, how you respond to them. Also, of course, if it's a negative response, these children that just irritate you, those are the ones you learn more from. Those are the ones you develop more from that interaction. You know, karma is, as I understand it, the definition of karma from the Sanskrit is work. What is our work together in this lifetime? It is not a tit for tat. It's not you did this, so now I have to do that. It is what is our work together. And what is the goal of the work on this planet is for both of us to be able to become more ourselves, to become closer to expressing the human archetype. So I could offer that as a kind of thing to keep in the back of your mind, not to be swept away by how darling this child is, or to be overwhelmed by how difficult this child is, but knowing that you can respond to these relationships, to these phenomena, in a free way, out of your own thinking and feeling and initiatives. And you will be able to do that in the most healing way, the more you are aware of your own inner self.
Thank you, Becky. So we maybe have time for two more questions. Having a hard time choosing here, but maybe to turn to this question that you posed around what affects the ego, and then if there's time, what does it mean to become more of myself?
This is often the question. Okay, so what affects the ego of the child? How do I do that? And that is kind of a shocking revelation that the human being is not made up of only 4 members, that there are additional 3 higher members when we are talking about this particular aspect. And what Steiner calls the next higher member, higher than the ego, is spirit self. He gives us 2 little hints about that in the lecture. One is that the spirit self is created out of the completely transformed astral body through the activity of the ego. So when you become so objective, so benign, a kind of bodhisattva, that's something of the spirit self. At this point in human evolution, we are not able to incarnate that individually. Steiner also says that the spirit self lives in a particular way in language, in our speech. That gives you a kind of a little glimmer of how you might be very conscious of the way that you speak to the children, the way that you use language, the way that you articulate language, whatever the language may be that you use in that relationship. And there's another aspect of the spirit self having to do with the fact that we can't incarnate that yet individually. And that kind of harkens back to the question of the person saying, well, how do I do this in a collegial situation? And that is that when there is a group of people who are striving out of these concepts, really working to attain this benign, well-meaning objectivity in their own astral body. And they're working with a question, a puzzle. Maybe it could be in a child study situation. If people are open to it, they can receive a kind of drop of wisdom from this higher self, this spirit self that is not able to incarnate individually, but as a group of striving individuals can sometimes get a little glimmer of it. That's why so many magical things can happen in a child study, things that you weren't expecting. So just the way there's so many things in this lecture that make you want to, close the book and just say, poof, that's enough for me, along with, I'm doing the work that the gods do. This one, that I have to be aware of something that I can't even incarnate yet. But somehow, just giving the idea, giving this concept, can make us look up to this living energy of the spirit self, know that it exists, and have it as a kind of faraway possibility, that I can bring an aspect of it into the way that I speak to the children. And of course, the way that the astral body expresses itself, one of the ways is through our communication, through our speech. So that is what affects the ego of the child, something that we can't even quite get a hold of yet. And what was the other question, Libby? I think we don't have time for it. Is that correct?
Maybe so. It may have to linger as a question for the future of what does it mean to become more of myself?
Yeah, I will put that as a good journaling question for all of you. What does it mean to become more of yourself? So thanks very much, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much, Becky, for these wonderful pictures. Thank you also to our interpreters and to our tech support. As always, a couple of quick notes. Recordings are being uploaded to the series website. Ava has put the link in the chat, so please go and visit those. I also understand that there were some audio issues on some of the language channels today. That audio should be much clearer in the recordings. There's always, there can always be room for interference when we're streaming live on Zoom, but the recordings are clearer. So if you missed any portions of the presentations, please go see if the audio is better there on the recordings. If you run into any issues there, please reach out to the email address that is listed underneath the videos. For tomorrow, please come again prepared with a pen and paper to do some writing with our presenter, Lacey Da Silva, who works with curative stories and imaginative pictures as a diagnostic path. So with that, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And thank you again to Becky for today's wonderful presentation. Recording stopped.
Good.